Hey everybody, it's Eric from EPautos.com, your Libertarian car guy, and I'm going to do a quasi-podcast, I guess, using my little cheap Contour Roam camera here. Hopefully one day I'll be able to afford functional equipment. Well, this is functional, but just barely. Anyway, I'm driving along here in the 2017 Chrysler Pacifica, which is not the old Pacifica, which was a station wagon. This is a minivan. And it is the replacement for the Town & Country minivan. I'm impressed that Chrysler is even trying. Traditional minivans have pretty much gone out of style, like wood-paneled station wagons did back in the 70s. Really, there are only a couple of manufacturers that are still selling them, and they're all Japanese. Honda has the Odyssey, Toyota has the Sienna, Nissan has the Quest, and Kia the Sedona, but GM and Ford backed out of this market entirely to focus on crossovers. Anyway, I will have a review of this thing up on the site, EPautos.com, shortly, but what I wanted to rant podcast about this morning is the recent $15 million fine levied against Harley-Davidson, which, like Volkswagen, was accused of cheating Uncle on the emissions stuff. But there are a couple of things about it that are noteworthy. First of all, Harley itself did not cheat. What Harley did was to sell over-the-counter tuning kits so that owners could reprogram their bikes for better performance and mileage. So it's hard for me to really understand how Harley is responsible. Not that I think Volkswagen is guilty of anything substantive either, but at least you could make the argument that it was Volkswagen that, air quotes, cheated the government, and the owners bought the cars thinking the cars were fully compliant with all of the EPA FOTWAs. In this case, EPA is not saying that Harley tricked customers or that the bikes that Harley sold were non-compliant with all of the EPA FOTWAs. They were. The kits, which were sold for off-road use only, may have fractionally increased the emissions of the particular bikes that were so modified. But here's the thing. We're talking about, all right, motorcycles, the totality, all the bikes that are registered in the United States, we're talking about 3% of the vehicles on the roads are motorcycles. I wasn't able to figure out which percentage of the 3% are Harleys, but it's probably something under 1% of the vehicles on the market that are Harleys. The aggregate, the total vehicle miles traveled of all the motorcycles, all the manufacturers, all the makes, is 0.7%, and that's according to the Department of Transportation. Those are their own statistics. So we're talking about a negligible, irrelevant, tiny, small number. As in the VW case, the government hasn't been able to adduce any harm caused, any victims. Nobody's been put forward in a wheelchair hooked up to an oxygen tank and shown to have been affected by any of this. Certainly not by Harley. It's preposterous. What's happened is that Harley, like Volkswagen, affronted the government, did something the government didn't like. And that is what constitutes crime, for the most part, in America today. Not the old standard of, well, did you hurt somebody? Did you cause damage to their property? Did you injure them in some way, a specific person? It used to be the case that you actually had to present a victim in a court before you could be found guilty of having done anything harmful and then held responsible for the harm that you caused. But now it's routine for people to be punished, and that's an important distinction, as opposed to being held responsible for having violated some statute or other, or done something that the government doesn't like. And again, note that distinction. You're punished rather than being held responsible. Because you can only be held responsible when there's a harm, when somebody can point to, well, let's see, you smashed a car, you did something that caused harm to somebody else's property, or you hurt another person. Those things are very tangible. They can be added up, they can be quantified. But how do you quantify the harm caused by violating a government statute? Well, you can't. So instead, they simply list punishments, or decree punishments, as in this case. So Harley's getting hit with a $15 million fine. and 3 million of that is going to mitigate, air quotes, I like to put these things in air quotes because to kind of just make fun of the bureaucraties, to mitigate the damage caused to the environment. Of course, no damage to the environment has been adduced. It's just make work, wealth transfer. And keep in mind that it's not Harley, the evil corporation. Harley is people who work for the company, people who make the motorcycles, people who design them, and so on, people who work on the bikes at dealerships. Those are the people who are going to be affected by this. And of course also people who buy Harleys, because the price of Harleys is likely to go up. The value of Harley stock is probably going to go down, or dividends will be less as a result of this. So basically everybody gets hurt except the government, for harms that have not been caused to anybody. It's very interesting and very odd. If it were up to me, from a libertarian point of view, I think that we should go back to the old standard of having to prove that some harm has been caused before anybody can be held accountable for anything. That goes not just for Harley, it goes for Volkswagen, it goes across the board. The stuff with the emissions, I know that a lot of people listening to this probably instinctively will respond, well, boy, Peters is advocating dirty air and isn't concerned about people's health. Well, the fact of the matter is that this emissions stuff has been a non-issue for a long time. Vehicles, recent model vehicles, and by recent I mean pretty much anything built since the 90s, so we're talking about more than 20 years now, produce virtually no emissions, assuming that they are mechanically sound. You know, that is, assuming they're not worn out and burning oil, in which case all bets are off. Low-hanging fruit was picked a long time ago. Vehicle emissions now are effectively nil, or very close to nil. In the Volkswagen case, the bitching was all about a fractional increase in hydrocarbon, oxides of nitrogen emissions, less than 1%. You probably heard news coverage and whining about up to 40 times, but it was profoundly dishonest or very ignorant coverage because they never really explained what that meant. And I will explain what it means. Roughly 3 to 5%, depending on the vehicle, of the remaining exhaust product in a new car, in a late model car, is not controlled or could be controlled. And the emissions reductions that are being talked about now are not even whole numbers. They're less than 1%. And the cheating that VW was accused of, same thing. Fractional increases that could be characterized as up to 40 times, but the standard by which that was measured was less than 1%. So very trivial, very small overall and individually, at tremendous cost. And I think that the public minimally has a right to be made aware of the cost versus benefit ratio of some of these regulations, and that perhaps more productive solutions could be found in the interests of air quality and so on. Anyway, there is an article up at EPautos that gets into this some more, which I hope you'll take a moment to stop by and check out. And if you like it, let other people know about it. And I should have a review of this Pacifica minivan up within the next day or so. So thanks for viewing, and we will catch up with you next time.